Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Nicole Glover, author of the novel The Undertakers, the second book in the Murder and Magic series. Nicole, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Sure. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your novel, The Undertakers, how would you describe the novel?
It's a fantasy murder mystery set in 1871 Philadelphia that follows a husband and wife detective duo who were both former Underground Railroad conductors. He decided they're going to solve mysteries, but they also have skills with magic. And a lot of the mysteries and other mysteries deal with magic around their neighborhood. And The Undertakers basically follows a mystery that they thought they solved in the month or so before the book starts, and find out in the course of the book, not only that it's not as solid as he thought it was, there's lots of other interesting things going on recently that's tied to it and leads to unexpected places.
That's great. Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to write The Undertakers? And also, what was your original idea for writing the Murder and Magic series?
Well, as The Undertakers is a book too, it's basically drew out of literally kind of came out of the conductors. I had gotten a 2-book deal when I sold the conductors initially. So as I was editing and rewriting the conductors, getting it ready for publications, I was cutting and taking certain things that could be used for the Undertakers, basically. Anything I kind of cut from the conductors, I thought maybe I could use certain plot points, certain ideas, or certain research that could fit in the conductors into the Undertakers. And the Undertakers kind of took shape from a lot of that cut stuff, and just a lot of interesting research bits that I thought were fascinating, like the rise of the volunteer fire companies, the shift to public services fire companies in Philadelphia at that time period, and this idea of these strange fires and people who are the kind of nefarious behind certain things. I found research about underground tunnels that was interesting, like as mostly question marks about how much they related to underground work during that time period and afterwards, and maybe the idea of these abandoned tunnels still being around and being put to some use, and there's some this little history of things like that. And just kind of pulling things I really liked, like a subplot involved a cipher that was largely inspired by the infamous Beale cipher. That there's a rumored treasure that's there's treasure somewhere in Virginia, and there's ciphers, a pamphlet with ciphers that you need to code, but no one's ever been able to do it, and there's the idea that it's fake. And I saw that and I was like, maybe I should make it my own fictional version of this and just weave it in there just for some fun. And other things, just continuing some of the character arcs and having a lot of fun with the world, because the best thing about book 2 is that after you already established the world and the characters, so you get to have more fun to kind of explore places and just go wild.
Well, what was your initial writing journey that led you to writing your first novel?
I've always loved to write and had different ideas for certain things. And I was also always wanted to be a published author because I loved books. I loved the idea of having my name on a book that's on a library shelf somewhere. So that was always my goal. And so I wrote a lot of different things over the years. And I think just before the conductors, I had been trying to seriously publish a few things. It was like a steampunk novel. There was, something kind of fairy tale rewrite. It's fairy tale princesses, that sort of thing. And I think even a superhero novel, but none of those were really given bites. So I was like, let's try something different. And I always loved history. I loved the idea of all the Underground Railroad conductors and all that kind of stuff. And I also got really intrigued by the Reconstruction period of post-Civil War time period. That was fascinating. And I had this idea of these characters and their past. And as I was messing around with the idea of that story, I had this random idea. Let's add magic to the story, because I've always been a fantasy reader because that makes it fun. And it's gonna just work really well. I added the fantasy and magic to it, and suddenly there was murder and mystery, and it just kind of came together really well. I was really intrigued by the characters, intrigued by all the interplays of these different genres clashing together.
Well, now that you've published these 2 books, have you thought about, or do you think that you'll go back to kind of like the cyberpunk novel at some point, or will you just keep looking ahead?
I mean, I've always had a lot of different ideas, and sometimes they fade away. I like to keep running a list of ideas or potential story seeds I have at a time. And as I got these two books, ready and published, some of them actually have fallen off. Of these ideas have just fallen off because I'm no longer interested, or I just have different directions I want to go with certain stories. So I always have a few spanners in the mix, so to speak, of different ideas. And I've gotten a chance. Once I think I set book two off to get published, I'd still work on some other stuff I'd kind of been putting on, letting kind of boil on the stove in the background.
Well, you mentioned research earlier. What kind of research did you do when you were writing The Undertakers?
A lot of it was actually much lower key that compared to my first book with the conductors, because I did a lot of intense stuff with the conductors. So Undertakers, it's more like cherry picking certain details. If I wanted to make sure I got certain Civil War battles or certain locations of that time period, I did more targeted research in that direction. I kind of just pulled back on a lot of the notes I had originally started with. I think I did find a couple of different new things that I was, as you always do when you're writing things, and kind of went with that. A lot of it is just kind of targeted to certain aspects of certain things.
Well, how did you decide on Philadelphia as a setting for The Undertakers?
Yeah, all my research kind of led me there to Philadelphia. There's a lot of fascinating aspects of it, because it played a big role in a lot of antebellum resistance to slavery at that time period. Philadelphia had a really large and robust black community for years, dating back from the American Revolutionary War days. And so it's a big, robust community with lots of activities, lots of people really active in the communities. And so there are a lot of interesting things to pull towards it. And that was it was an interesting area, and a lot of good history, a lot of good landscape to pull different things in there. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. It just made it just felt like a perfect fit for the story when I just started placing characters.
That's great. Well, what was your writing process when you were working on The Undertakers? Did you outline the novel extensively or just dive into the narrative?
I always find when I start writing, I usually just I have a few plot points. I come in, so these are murder mysteries. I come in with the idea of who's the victim, who's the murderer, how they did it, and some ideas of why. And other than some key scenes I want to do, I kind of just start writing with about the first third or so. I kind of just, a lot of it, since it's set up, a lot of it is figuring out, putting all those initial pieces of the mystery in place, and of course reintroducing the character world and characters to readers, and not in a gentle way. That's I kind of just free write that, and once I hit about the 30% mark, that's when I start to outline, where it's to do a broader picture outline that it's just some key scenes, important scenes, all those different things like that. And the further along, I'll reinforce that outline. So I kind of view the first draft as a big brainstorm, ongoing brainstorm of certain things. It's all about me getting all the words and ideas and scenes into my mind. When I'm here to draft the first draft, is I keep the draft's not done until I run out of new scenes that come to mind. When I start thinking of how to improve or revise or change up scenes, I know I'm moving into revision. And I spend most of my time revising. And that's the part of writing I would love, because that's where I can do all the alchemy of writing by combining scenes, merging characters, figuring out plot points, or just rearranging the story that's in a way that strengthens certain plots, subplots, and just bring in just things that interest me.
And when you're doing that revision process that you just described, can you give us a little bit of kind of the nuts and bolts? I mean, are you when you're combining a scene or when you're cutting out, are you keeping info? Are you keeping that writing in another file that you can go back to? I'm just curious about kind of the.
Yeah, I do that. I work in Word, so I'll have several documents open. I have my main manuscript document. I'll have a document with all the notes, character notes, murderers, all this different timeline stuff. Another document is basically a dump file where everything I cut ends up there. And sometimes when I'm even revising a scene, I might copy that and just stick it there anyway, just in case I might select certain lines or rearrange certain things. So basically a big old dump file that I keep drawing back to. And sometimes I take it to point of pride when I have several thousand words in there after a while. But yeah, I keep everything I write because a lot of times it's it might spark something else. Like I said, like it's like a large scale brainstorming. So there might be something like a line or a mood of a certain scene that could be changed up in different fashion later on in manuscript. So I have a bunch of those, and sometimes I even draw back from like older stuff I've written. There's like other like drafts that will not become books, but they have like certain scenes, or I remember certain scenes, remember certain characters, remember certain lines that I find that the revision process could work well with what I'm currently writing. So the only trick with that is I have to remember which like file that is. Sometimes I'm really good at remembering, but sometimes I don't. So sometimes I'll have like all these, because I do a lot of different draft versions of stuff. So I have to go through my files to try to remember when was the most latest date I worked on this where I could find it. And sometimes I waste time going through these files looking for a scene. Then to find out that it's not going to really work to begin with, because it's like, so I had to change so much anyway, but it's just basically sparking all these changes as I'm revising.
Interesting. Well, are you working on a new novel now? Hi, this is Jeff, the host of the Reading and Writing podcast. I wanted to tell you about an app that can change how you plan parties and celebrations at your home. Drizzly. Drizzly is the most convenient way to buy beer, wine, and spirits, with delivery to your doorstep in under 60 minutes. Are you hosting a book club party and you need a couple of bottles of wine? Well, keep in mind Drizzly. Or do you and your friends make cocktails based on your favorite book characters or novels? If so, again, use Drizzly. That's DRIZLY.com. Drizzly is the #1 app for alcohol delivery. Again, that's Drizzly, DRIZLY.com. And right now, if you act, Drizzly is giving every new customer $5 off their first order. Just use the promo code FAST5 at checkout.
This ad is almost 3 million gallons long, because it's exactly the same amount of time it takes for that much water to flow over the deck at Niagara Falls. So, how does the deck stand up to all that water? Thompson's Water Seal. Just another reason they call us America's recognized brand in water protection. Weather protected, water sealed. Thompson's Water Seal. Trust the seal. Available at a retailer near you.
Yeah, I'm always working on something. I actually just finished revising a novel I wrote earlier this year that just doing my little final phases before I send off to my agent and stuff for her feedback, certain things. But that's kind of fun to kind of fine tune something that's fully done, but not like perfect fit done like you would see a published novel. I had finished up something back in October that was basically that just is an idea of a book that came up like this year, literally, because it's like just vibes of different things I really liked, and it still needs some work, but I'm letting it rest for now so I can have some time to refresh your eyes, look back at certain plot things. But I always stop when I get to a spot where it's pretty good. And so in the meantime, I'm working on something new because, I'm tempted to see that get into book 3 by the end of this year. And I might be able to, because I had actually drafted out this particular book at one point last year. So I have an outline to work with, and it's a pretty good high concept. So I might be able to do, fingers crossed, for the end of this year, come out with book 3, finished, at least for a draft.
That's great.
So, we'll see.
Well, given your success with the first 2 books in this Murder and Magic series, and as you said, you got these published after you working on other novels, a cyberpunk novel, etc. What writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories and novels?
Yeah, my big thing is, write what you like, write things you enjoy writing about. Because, if you write to a market or write to write a specific target idea or audience, you're going to end up not really liking it because you spend a lot of time with these books, hours and hours, so many constant revisions. that if you write something you don't really like, you're going to end up hating it. So if you start off with at least something you really love and something you enjoy, you'll find it'd be nice to come back each time. You know how many times you need to doing it. Other advice is to kind of keep in mind that things can change with the book. It's not over until it's actually printed. So it's change. You change. You don't get in the mindset of like you're locked in place of certain plot things. I fall victim to that a lot of thinking I can't change this because I wrote all this particular plot line out, but until it's printed, you can change whatever you like. So yeah, just remember, and everything can change. You can cut out plots. You can cut out a third of the book. You can remove characters. You can add characters. You can add romantic plots, remove them, all this other stuff. Everything can change with the book. It's not done until it's printed.
That's good. Well, what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
I guess it's been busy. I know I've been reading a lot of different comics and stuff, and most of just kind of I actually just finished the big reread of this comic that I really loved. It finished a few years ago. It was called Giant Days. It was published by Boombox, and so it's basically a slice of life of like college students in England. And it's always it was a fun to reread that and just revisit that story. It's nonfiction. I've been reading a lot of research for nonfiction, so I'm not going. There's just various things of this different topics from like ancient archaeological discovery, space race. I actually got a few recommendations from like a podcast the other day about like this food. I guess they call him the food spy. I forget his name because I just picked up the book in the library. But he basically was like, the podcast described him as like a food spy who went around. I guess it was like late 19th century, early 20th century. He was basically looking around for new foods to sell to market in America or in the US. And he basically went around the world to kind of looking for foods. I'm interested to kind of look through that book, and I think I just got to read through that.
That sounds interesting. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, that's mostly why I picked it up too. It's because it's like that sounds interesting. And also a lot of times I read a lot of nonfiction. Sometimes I might end up being sparking for like different like fantasy stuff. Like I was thinking like maybe even if I'm not going to write literally like in like the US about this particular food, but I might feel like might be something a character that could feature in some other future book. But it's just but that's the thing I always like. A lot of times, no matter what I read, especially particularly nonfiction, it's like this could be inspiration for something else. So it's kind of hard. Like sometimes it's like it's mixing like work with pleasure, but it's a good way of mixing work and pleasure.
That's good. Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your novels?
Yeah, I have a website. It's Nicole-Glover.com. And I'm also on Twitter. It's basically my name, but except for it's the B is replaced with a W. So it's like Nicole Glover.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Nicole Glover, author of the novel The Undertakers, the second book in the Murder and Magic series. The book is on sale now, so go buy a copy. And Nicole, thanks for doing this interview.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot. Now, stay tuned for a brief excerpt from the audiobook of The Undertakers, the Murder and Magic series, Book 2 by Nicole Glover, narrated by Bonnie Turpin. Available wherever audiobooks are sold.
Chapter 1. July, 1871. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Hex, curse, or charm? Hetty asked, as they strode down Barclay Street. Don't say that hex and curse are the same. There are nuances, you know. Of course there are, her husband replied. Benji took a moment to consider the question before replying. I think it's a jinx. That wasn't a choice? Should be. There's got to be a reason that place is still standing. Benji pointed to the only house on this end of the street. Despite its neighbors being reduced to piles of rubble, this home was untouched by the fire. A state that was quite unnerving, given that even the still-standing homes of the street had shown some signs of the fire. Since the end of May, news of a fire had reached their ears twice a week, and sometimes more. While small fires around a single home or a building were not uncommon, these fires were different. They engulfed both sides of a street, and once they started, they raged until they burned themselves out. Such fires led people to craft charms and potions to keep their homes safe. And the ones that didn't make their own bought them from charlatans who touted fireproofing potions that could barely quell a candle's flame. While reports of this fire would have brought them to this street anyway, Hetty and Benji got word of it in a somewhat different manner. Just after midday, Hetty had found a card left in their post box. A card with a sun and a crescent moon drawn on one side, and on the other a brief message. Last night, a fire took 8 homes on Barclay Street and scorched more than a few, but one home stands untouched by the flames. Such a message wasn't just odd, it was downright peculiar. And peculiar was their business. Although the day was still young, the fire itself was a distant memory, with only traces of smoke left in the air. What it left in its wake was still evident. Buildings here were mostly made of wood and were home to several families, both large and small. While this wasn't the slums, neither were the people rich. Some homes were divided so that as many as 6 families occupied a building, and most people rented out a spare room to any interested boarder. While only 8 houses had burned down, every building on the street, save the one miraculously spared, was damaged. This meant, of course, the street was filled with people. There were those who lived on this street, making light repairs to their home and casting spells of protection. There were people tending to the dead and wounded, people checking on neighbors to see what survived the fire, and others jealously guarding piles of recovered possessions. As Hetty and Benji walked the length of the street, several people called out to Benji for help. This was not unusual. The blacksmith shop Benji used to work at was not far from here, and he was generous with his time and repairs. It wasn't surprising that so many recognized him on sight as the person likely to lend a helping hand. Not that he was hard to forget, in Hetty's humble opinion. He cut a handsome figure, even in plain attire of shirt sleeves and suspenders. Although more appealing was the easy air of competence and unsatiable curiosity in the world. While Benji often pretended that other people's problems held no interest to him, they had gotten involved in mystery solving because deep down, he couldn't help but care. "You take this end of the street, and I'll take the other," Benji said to Hetty. "We'll meet at the still-standing house." "Why not go there first?" Hetty asked. "Because there are plenty more interesting questions to ask before we do." With that, Benji crossed the street to assist a man dragging a trunk out from the rubble, already asking about what had happened last night. Hetty should do the same, but she was a bit reluctant. It was never easy asking questions about the fires.